Luis Borges, born in 1899, is considered one of the forefathers of the Latin American literature boom. His deep explorations on the nature of space, time, and reality, as well as language and linguistics, have fascinated readers for a century and continue to do so. The following video essay will attempt to shed new light on one of his most famous stories, the Library of Babel, by paralleling it with different contemporary media artifacts that in various ways illustrate dialogue and enhance its many interpretations. In the tale, Borges comes up with the idea of the Library of Babel. The universe, which others call the library, is composed of an indefinite and perhaps infinite number of hexagonal galleries, with vast air shafts between, surrounded by very low railings. From any of the hexagons one can see, interminably, the upper and lower floors. The distribution of the galleries is invariable. 20 shelves, 5 long shelves per side, cover all the sides except 2. Their height, which is the distance from floor to ceiling, scarcely exceeds that of a normal bookcase. Within this space, all of the possible combinations of the 25 symbols of the alphanumeric alphabet are contained in an unimaginably large number of books, approximately 25 to the power of 1,312,000 to be exact. The sheer size of this number is hard to grasp. It is many, many orders of magnitude larger than the size of the observable universe as we currently understand it. For the characters in the book, it is in every practical sense infinite. The story follows a first-person tale of one of the inhabitants of this universe, who ponders upon the mysteries of the library and attempts to explain how humans try to make sense of it. He narrates the many ways in which humans have toyed with explications about the characteristics of the library. First, they manage to comprehend its aberrant nature, after finding within the chaos of nonsense a book whose content they manage to decipher. Some notions of combinative analysis, illustrated with examples of variations with unlimited repetition. These examples made it possible for a librarian of genius to discover the fundamental law of the library. This thinker observed that all the books, no matter how diverse they might be, are made up of the same elements, the space, the period, the comma, the 22 letters of the alphabet. He also alleged the fact which travelers have confirmed. In the vast library there are no two identical books. The incomprehensible size of the library made all meaning disappear. This thought brings to mind when it was proclaimed that the library contained all books, the first impression was one of extravagant happiness. All men felt themselves to be the masters of an intact and secret treasure. There was no personal or world problem whose eloquent solution did not exist in some hexagon. However, the sheer size of the library negated all hope of actually finding any sense amongst the chaos, which quickly led to despair. As was natural, this inordinate hope was followed by an excessive depression. The certitude that some shelf in some hexagon held precious books, and that these precious books were inaccessible, seemed almost intolerable. Infinity is impossible to comprehend. It simply renders humans meaningless, infinitely small in contrast to the sheer size of the library. Amongst the interminable shelves, generations die and are reborn without leaving a dent upon the faceless space. Some even tried and quietly failed. Others, inversely, believed that it was fundamental to eliminate useless works. They invaded the hexagons, showed credentials which were not always false, leafed through a volume with displeasure and condemned whole shelves. Their hygienic ascetic furor caused the senseless perdition of millions of books. These efforts were pointless. Their name is execrated, but those who deplore the treasures destroyed by this frenzy neglect two notable facts. 1. The library is so enormous that any reduction of human origin is infinitesimal. The other, every copy is unique, irreplaceable, but, since the library is total, there are always several 100,000 imperfect facsimils, works which differ only in a letter or a comma. The incomprehensible size of the library made all meaning disappear. This thought brings to mind a recent situation. No Man's Sky, a space exploration video game, which proposes to use a generative algorithm to depict a universe in which a nigh infinite amount of planets exist. The inhabitants of the universe spend their time wandering about the planets, gathering materials in order to upgrade their equipment, which in turn offers access to new planets in a repeating cycle. It is interesting that although the game sold millions of copies upon release, it has received very mixed reactions from the players, many calling it a failure. A lot of them found the game to be a constant, grinding, pointless repetition of near identical actions in mildly varying conditions. Perhaps, like the inhabitants of the library, who struggle to find any meaning amongst the never-ending shelves, us players aren't ready to immerse ourselves in such sheer magnitude of information. Amongst the quintillion planets, each one theoretically unique, each one proposing a special look and feel, it is impossible to find a sense of direction or meaning. The overwhelming amount of potential, the treasure sitting amongst the library, are essentially impossible to find. In the story, Borges was questioning the relationship of humans with the seemingly infinite universe, its incomprehensible complexity. Back in 1941, it was impossible to illustrate this and thus understand the physical and emotional consequences of actually experiencing it. Without any intentions of doing so, a contemporary first-person sci-fi shooter demonstrated exactly how intense the experience would have felt to the librarians. Nowadays, a few months after the release, the game is mostly empty, uninhabited. Many players have disconnected, like the suicidal men who plunged into the void between the shelves. They were incapable of wringing meaning out of the infinite. In contrast to the pointless exercise in never-ending repetition that proved to be No Man's Sky, I propose to observe Manifold Garden, due for release in 2017, a game which uses infinity in a controlled, contained manner as a concrete element of gameplay and aesthetic design. The premise of the game is to change the gravitational direction of space, solving puzzles and exploring new areas. Very quickly, the player is faced with the challenge of utilizing the bizarre physics in creative, complex situations. Eventually he encounters outdoor scenarios. In order for this type of space to work within the game, the designer had to create a four-dimensional space in which structures repeat infinitely, looping upon themselves, transgressing our typical logic, and offering a new dimension of gameplay. This leads to very interesting situations, such as eternal falls, which beautifully echo those of the librarians. Once I am dead, there will be no lack of pious hands to throw me over the railing. My grave will be the fathomless air. My body will sink endlessly and decay and dissolve in the wind generated by the fall, which is infinite. The player has to overcome the overwhelming feeling of chaos and complexity that infinity creates, and decipher the way this space functions. By doing so, he progresses and is capable of solving more and more complex puzzles. The player must comprehend the universe, find its logic, and reach an increasingly sophisticated understanding of it. This reflects the central idea of the narration, in which the main character describes the different ways of making sense of the boundless, incomprehensible library he has encountered along his life. The game illustrates his final conclusion very beautifully. I venture to suggest this solution to the ancient problem. The library is unlimited and cyclical. If an eternal traveler were to cross it in any direction, after centuries, he would see that the same volumes were repeated in the same disorder, which, thus repeated, would be an order. The order. My solitude is gladdened by this elegant hope. Even though the space is infinite, it contains an order. Like the story, the game uses repetition as an anchor, as a way of grounding infinity and focusing it, condensing it. Elegance. Without losing a sense of awe and immensity amongst the infinite, intricate structures, the game offers a very succinct, efficient way of using complexity in favor of design, and not against it. Language is the substance that the library subverts, making it reach its limits by expanding it infinitely. The overwhelming, chaotic nature of how the library would function can be experienced in virtual pieces that exemplify it. The webpage, the Library of Babel, contains all possible combinations of 25 characters in pages of 3,200 characters, about 10 to the power of 4,677 books, an infinitesimal fraction of the actual size of the story's library, but enormous nonetheless. Based on this database, various video games have been made, 3D simulations of the library. Within, it is impossible to find any sense, any direction, any place to go. Everything appears to be nonsense. Any book you open is just random characters. However, one can type any phrase and the game will teleport you to the location of a book that contains it, essentially undermining the feeling of hopelessness Borges imagined, the sense of chaos and lack of meaning. One can find any page made of 3,200 characters one could dream of. Thus, it is possible, like the librarians did, to wonder what gems hide within the drivel. The library is total, and its shelves register all the possible combinations of the 22 orthographical symbols, a number which, though extremely vast, is not infinite. Everything. The minutely detailed history of the future, the archangel's autobiographies, the faithful catalogues of the library, thousands and thousands of false catalogues, the demonstration of the fallacy of those catalogues, the demonstration of the fallacy of the true catalogue, the Gnostic gospel of Basilides, the commentary on that gospel, the commentary on the commentary of that gospel, the true story of your death, the translation of every book in all languages, the interpolations of every book in all books. Infinity is a delicate subject to treat. Its utter size renders things meaningless, pointless, infinitesimal. On the other hand, when encapsulated, particularized, and given a concrete function, it becomes aesthetic and expressive, an image so poignant, so overarching, it transmits a sense of perspective that deeply resonates with our beings. Amongst the void of time and space, here we are, tiny particles of meaning, cosmically microscopic creatures struggling and dreaming and crying and living. Here we are, making our own systems of meaning, dreaming our own infinite libraries. We write books, make games, fantasize. As long as we continue pointing the lens of our creativity on the infinite mysteries of nature, its eternal dimensions, we shall slowly come to terms with what we are. Perhaps, like the librarian, we can dream of finding an order.